I knew this morning wasn't Oppos. T going to end with a handshake and a smile the second I saw 5 white SUVs, a lawyer in a suit that cost more than my first tractor, and a massive yellow Komatsu bulldozer idling at my front gate. It was barely past 6 a.m., and the Texas sun was just starting to lick the tops of the cedar trees. But there they were, a little army of bureaucrats ready to play God with my dirt. I didn't in Oppos. T-rush, I didn't in Oppos. T-panic, I just set my coffee mug on the porch rail, walked back inside to grab my old Remington 870, and felt the cold weight of the walnut stock against my palm as I stepped back out into the humidity. Because when people show up at your home with heavy machinery before the dew has even dried, they aren't in Oppos. T there to talk, they're there to conquer. You see, I'm Elias Thorne, and I've lived on this ridge for 62 years. My father broke this ground with a mule and a dream, and his father before him fought the droughts and the floods just to keep these 300 acres in the family name. But in the eyes of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, I'm just a, in quote, non-compliant obstacle, in quote, in the path of progress. They've been creeping toward my fence line for a decade, building these cookie-cutter mansions with their HOA-approved beige paint and their manicured lawns that look like plastic, and they hate me because my grass grows wild. My barn is weathered, and I refuse to sell my legacy for a suburban cul-de-sac. It all started about 4 days ago when I was walking the south perimeter, just checking the wire after a thunderstorm, and I spotted something that made the hair on my neck stand up, a row of bright red survey stakes hammered deep into my soil, nearly 50 yards past my actual boundary line. I knelt down, running my thumb over the fresh plastic tops, and I saw the initials in quote, WCA in quote, written in black marker, Willow Creek Association, and I knew right then that the end quote, shadow survey in quote, rumors I'd heard down at the hardware store were more than just gossip. I drove straight into town to see Marlene at the county records office, and when she pulled up the digital plat for my section, her face went as pale as a ghost because there was a newly filed expansion map showing a and quote, Community Access Parkway and quote, running right through the heart of my southern pasture, and right there in the corner was a signature block with my name on it, a signature I never wrote, a jagged, sloppy forgery that some corporate lawyer probably drafted over a martini. Marlene whispered to me, and quote, Elias, they filed this 48 hours ago as an Oppos, emergency public safety easement, and Oppos, claiming you in Oppos. D agreed to the development in exchange for a tax waiver, end quote. And I felt a heat rise in my chest that had nothing to do with the Texas summer, because this wasn't in Oppos. T just a land grab. It was a professional hit on my property rights. I went back to the ranch, and I wasn't in Oppos. T home 10 minutes before I heard a high-pitched whine overhead, and I looked up to see a black drone hovering maybe 30 feet above my porch, its camera lens twitching as it scanned my windows, probably looking for a reason to call me in quote, unstable in quote, or in quote, negligent, in quote, I didn't in Oppos. T-wave, I didn't in Oppos. T-shout, I just walked to the shed, grabbed a box of birdshot, and showed that drone exactly what a Texas rancher thinks of uninvited. Paparazzi. And when it turned into a cloud of plastic confetti and slammed into the dirt, the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard all year. But the HOA, specifically their board president, a woman named Regina Vance who treats the neighborhood like her personal kingdom, didn't in Oppos. T take kindly to me shooting down her in quote, surveillance equipment, end quote. By that evening, the local Facebook groups were on fire with posts calling me a, end quote, dangerous militant, end quote, and an end quote, environmental hazard, end quote, using edited photos of my old burn barrel to make it look like I was running a toxic waste site. But the real storm broke at midnight. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't in Oppos, Tino, and when I answered, it was Jenna, a young girl who'd been working as Regina's assistant at the HOA office, someone I'd always been polite to when I saw her at the grocery store. She was sobbing, breathing so hard I thought she'd collapse, telling me she'd found the USB drive, the one with the back alley contract between the HOA and a massive development firm called Sterling Heights. And she told me they were coming for her because she refused to shred the evidence. End quote. Elias, they're right behind me. Please, I'm near the Old Creek crossing, end quote. She screamed, and the line went dead with the sound of a heavy metallic thud and the screech of tires on gravel. I didn't in Oppos. T called the cops because the county sheriff in Oppos, S. cousin sits on that HOA board, and I knew the response would be, in quote, delayed, in quote. So I jumped in my F-350, the one with the heavy steel brush guard, and I tore down that back road like a bat out of hell. I caught sight of them near the bridge. Jenna's little silver sedan was being boxed in by two black SUVs, professional-looking rigs with tinted windows, and they were trying to pit maneuver her right into the ravine. I didn't oppose, hesitate. I just lined up my bumper, dropped the gear, and put all 6 tons of American steel into the side of the lead SUV, a bone-jarring impact that sent them spinning into the tall grass while I swerved, blocked the second vehicle, and hollered for Jenna to get in my truck. We made it back to the ranch, and I spent the rest of the night sitting on the porch with Jenna, shivering inside, watching the headlights of those SUVs idle at the end of my driveway, just out of range like wolves waiting for the fire to go out. But I had a trick up my sleeve. You see, I spent 30 years as an irrigation engineer before I fully retired to the ranch, and I'd spent the last year setting up a, in quote, nuisance deterrent, in quote, system for the coyotes. I'd modified my perimeter sprinklers to run off a high-pressure pump connected to a tank of liquid capsicum, pure pepper extract, and when those, in quote, security contractors, in quote, finally got brave enough to step over my fence line at 2 a.m. with their tactical vests and zip ties, I just tapped a button on my remote and watched the yard vanish in a burning orange mist. They didn't oppose to even get 10 feet before they were on their knees, retching and clawing at their eyes, stumbling back to their vehicles while I stood there in the dark, just a silhouette on the porch, letting them know that the rules of the city didn't oppose to apply past my gate. That brings us back to this morning. The, end quote, final enforcement action, end quote, as the lawyer called it, with the sun beating down and the bulldozer engine rattling the windows of my house. Regina Vance was standing there in a pristine white pantsuit, looking like she'd stepped out of a luxury magazine, shouting through a megaphone about, end quote, county-mandated access, end quote, and, end quote, court-ordered demolition, end quote. She looked at me, her eyes full of a strange kind of pity, and said, end quote, Elias, just move aside. You're an old man fighting an ocean with a bucket. This road is happening whether you're standing here or not. End quote. I looked at her, then at the kid in the bulldozer. Couldn't oppose. He had been more than 20, hands shaking on the controls, and I said, end quote, Regina, you spent so much time looking at maps and spreadsheets that you forgot what it's like to stand on ground that was paid for in blood. And if that machine moves 1 more inch, you're going to find out exactly how expensive that mistake is, end quote. The lawyer stepped up, waving a folder, end quote. We have a signed easement, Mr. Thorne. This is a legal proceeding, end quote. I just smiled because at that moment my attorney, a shark named Miller who specializes in land fraud, was already at the courthouse with Jenna and the USB drive. I held up my hand and told the bulldozer operator, end quote, son, I'm not going to shoot you, but I'm going to shoot the hydraulic line on that arm. And when 3,000 pounds of pressure explodes in your face, I hope Regina's insurance covers your hospital bill. End quote. I saw the kid's eyes go wide, his knuckles turning white, and Regina screamed, end quote. Proceed. He's bluffing. He won't do it, end quote. The bulldozer lurched forward, the heavy bucket dipping low to catch the wood of my gate, and I didn't oppose. Think, I just felt the world go quiet, exhaled halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The slug didn't oppose. Hit a person. It hit the main hydraulic coupling under the primary boom with a violent, metallic ping, and a split second later, a jet of scalding blue fluid sprayed 30 feet into the air like a geyser. The bulldozer's arm went limp, the bucket slamming into the dirt with a thud that shook the earth, and the engine coughed once before dying in a cloud of black smoke as the operator scrambled out of the cab like his pants were on fire. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of Regina screaming about, end quote, destruction of property, end quote, and, end quote, felony interference, end quote. But then the sound of a siren started drifting up the ridge. Not the HOA's pet security, but a state trooper full. Oh, by my lawyer in a black Mercedes. Miller stepped out, looking cool and collected, and handed a stack of papers to the lawyer and Regina. And I'll never forget the way her face turned from a bright, angry red to a sickly, pale gray as she read the words, end quote, injunction, end quote, fraudulent filing, end quote, and, end quote, grand larceny investigation, end quote. It turned out that USB Drive had everything. The emails between Regina and the Sterling Heights developers detailing how they were going to, quote, pressure and quote, me out of my land, the receipts for the forger who faked my signature, and the plans to divert county tax funds into the HOA's private accounts. The state trooper didn't end oppose. He come to arrest the, end quote, dangerous rancher, end quote. He came to escort Regina Vance and her lawyer down to the station for a very long conversation with the district attorney. As they were being led away, I walked up to the fence, resting my arms on the cedar plank that was still warm from the sun, and I looked Regina right in the eyes. She looked small now, stripped of her megaphone and her fancy SUVs. I said, and quote, you know, the thing about people like you is that you think everything has a price tag. You think if you push hard enough, the world will bend to your will, but out here the land doesn't and oppose. T care about your titles or your beige paint. It only cares about who's willing to stand up for it. And it looks like I'm still standing. End quote. She didn't end oppose. T say a word as the patrol car door slammed shut. And as the dust settled and the bulldozer was towed away, Jenna came out of the house. Looking at the ridge with a sense of peace, I dawned and oppose. T thinks she'd felt in years. We sat on the porch for a long time, just watching the cattle graze in the southern pasture, the same pasture they wanted to turn into a highway, and I realized that my gate was more than just wood and wire. It was a boundary between two worlds, and as long as I'm breathing, that boundary stays closed to anyone who doesn't and oppose. T respect the dirt they and oppose. Rewalking on. The Willow Creek HOA is under receivership now. Regina is facing 10 to 15 years for fraud and racketeering, and the end quote, Community Access Parkway, end quote, has been officially deleted from the county maps, but even with all that, I still catch myself looking toward the road every time I hear a car engine, wondering if the next group of, end quote, progressives, end quote, is already planning their next move. Because that's the thing about power, it doesn't end oppose. T go away just because one person gets caught, it just changes shape and waits for a new face to wear. So, I've got to ask you guys, because I've been thinking about this a lot while sitting out here under the stars, was I right to take it that far? Some people in town say I'm a hero for standing up to the corporate machine, but others say I'm just a stubborn old man who could have settled this in a boardroom instead of standoff with a shotgun and a bulldozer. Is there ever a point where, end quote, protecting your home, end quote, goes too far, or is your land the one thing in this world you're allowed to defend by any means necessary? I want to hear your stories. Have you ever had an HOA try to breathe down your neck, or a developer try to squeeze you out of what's yours? Drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done if that bulldozer was pointed at your front door, because out here the only thing thicker than the blood in our veins is the dirt under our fingernails. And I want to know if you think I did the right thing, or if I'm just a relic of a time that's already passed. Let's talk about it. Because as long as we're talking, we're still holding the line.